Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now when it comes to modern games, it seems like the line between lower and higher settings is getting more and more blurred. This can be good and bad. If your PC is a bit older and lower end, you can turn the visuals way down and still experience a similar level of graphical fidelity to someone with a high end rig, albeit with increased performance. On the other hand, there might not actually be enough of a change between settings or presets to make enough of a performance difference at all, not without enabling some sort of upscaling technique. None of this applies to every game out there of course, but with the difference at complete opposite ends of the graphical spectrum shrinking in some scenarios, that made me wonder just what sort of differences there are between high and ultra. There have been videos made discussing ultra settings before and how sometimes the visual changes aren't worth the performance sacrifice. I find myself agreeing with this. I rarely use ultra or the equivalent highest settings because even if there are noticeable changes between screenshots, in motion the impact of any extra effects can seem far more redundant. If you have the graphical horsepower though, why not? If you want to play at ultra and you've got the hardware to support it, then why shouldn't you? I'm not trying to deter you from maxing out your favourite games by any means, but what I wanted to do today was compare a few modern titles at their highest and then their second highest presets, just to see what sort of difference there is, both in terms of graphical quality and performance. The game you see on screen, GTA 5, is excluded from this test as I'm focusing on newer games with aforementioned predetermined presets, but I do hope you've enjoyed this little bit of gameplay anyway. It's important to remember that sticking to presets isn't necessary either, and combining a mixture of options is always the best way to get the frame rates you want. Some in-game presets will also change a lot more options than others, and flicking to ultra might only adjust 3 or 4 settings. But let's get into it and start with our first screenshots. I'm going to stay quiet for this bit and let you seek out any differences for yourselves before moving on to and discussing the performance differences with each title. First up, it's Cyberpunk 2077. I'm using my usual i5 12400F and RTX 3050 setup for these tests, but of course performance will differ depending on your PC and the resolution you play at. With my system we're getting 47 FPS on average at the Ultra preset. If we look at the high settings gameplay, you'll notice that our game is sitting at above 60 FPS more often, and the percentile lows have also increased. They remain stable here as well with no issues to report. I think it's safe to say that The Last of Us looks great at any setting, though it certainly is demanding. There have definitely been improvements since launch, that's for sure, especially on the CPU side of things, and I've noticed that gameplay seems a lot smoother and consistent. With Ultra, we're getting an average of 40 frames per second with percentile lows of 33 and 26 respectively. This is a lot better than what I was experiencing on launch day, that's for sure. Now the next preset down is the high preset, and here we got an average of 54, again with decent percentile lows. This woodland area is a great example of where the visuals and effects really stand out, and there's a 14 FPS difference on average between the highest and second highest available in-game presets here. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, in my opinion, is probably one of the games that looks most similar between high and ultra, so it's no surprise performance doesn't really change. I do think there is still a little way to go with optimization, but I've noticed a few positive changes already. One of them is that FSR has been fixed and actually turns off when you turn it off. It could have just been that the render resolution dropped natively as opposed to FSR being stuck on, but whatever it was, at least it is fixed. Now at epic settings we saw figures of 43, 34 and 31 respectively. At high we saw 45, 36 and 33. Subtle differences I guess you could say, or perhaps stats within a margin of error. Either way, with my hardware it makes little difference going from epic to high, so I'd be inclined to stick with epic if I was playing natively. Things here might be subject to change with future updates of course. The differences might change massively, who knows. Forza Horizon 5's highest preset is the Extreme preset, and my 3050 can't quite manage 60 FPS. It comes as close as is possibly achievable, but it doesn't quite get there. Still, the percentile figures are solid and there are no issues, and there will still be a lot of moments whereby the game does hit at least 60 at Extreme, mostly outside of multi-competitor races. It looks great, by the way. Ultra is actually the second highest preset in this game, and definitely the one I'd stick to with this CPU and card combo. I also have 32 gigs of RAM in my PC, but in an earlier video I found that this doesn't actually change much in gaming over the 16 gigs I had before. Not yet, anyway. I actually noticed quite a lot of the background detail was improved with the Extreme preset over Ultra, based on that initial screenshot you saw, but as with all of these comparisons, let me know what you think below. Let's move on to Hogwarts Legacy. I often find that people are split when it comes to the graphics here, at any preset, but I quite like the way this game looks. Now I will admit that I don't think the visuals quite justify the sometimes questionable performance, but just like with The Last of Us, there have been some improvements made since it came out. It seems as though the stutter has been reduced quite a bit. It's still not perfect, but it is far better. 46 FPS on average was the result at Ultra, with dips towards the low 30s as we made our way through this wooded area. Dropping to high increased the figures across the board as you might expect, but at the 0.1% low end of things, there wasn't much of a change. I like the way that the shadows and lighting are handled here with both presets. I haven't really progressed at all since I got this game, but I find that this area makes for quite a good testing ground, given how demanding it can be. Sons of the Forest looks great, but there's not much to say here performance-wise. The Ultra preset doesn't really affect the average performance that much over high, but you may have noticed that the 0.1% figure was a lot lower with the higher preset. Now this isn't really anything you should be too concerned about. I noticed one big frame dip when I walked through the same dense bushes, but that was it. If you have similar hardware to mine, then I honestly wouldn't worry about the Ultra preset negatively impacting performance all that severely. There really wasn't much of a difference at all. Finally then we have Dead Space, the 2023 remake, and things might be harder to see here than with the rest of the tests, but I wanted to include a generally darker game as a contrast to pretty much everything else. Here there was actually very little difference once again, but just like in Sons of the Forest, I noticed one prominent and extremely brief dip in performance with the higher setting. This was actually when moving between two different areas though, and honestly, overall there really wasn't much else to put me off playing at Ultra. As always, it's entirely up to you, and so is whether or not you can see much of a distinction between the screenshots that I've shown you today. Do you think the highest settings are worth it? And if so, in which games? Let me know your thoughts below in the comments as always, because I do enjoy reading them. It's also worth mentioning that customising your settings will also allow you to potentially get an even more similar looking game to Ultra while retaining mostly lower than ultra settings. Again, this is why I'd spend time tweaking certain options yourself. I've tried to keep my personal observations as absent as possible in this one to keep things neutral, but I will reiterate that most of the time I'd rather stick with the second to highest preset where I can. It's important to remember that different games, different hardware configurations and other system factors will affect the outcome of your own tests though, so play around with the settings to find out what's best for you. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already and you want to, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.